Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Derek tipped me off to a story happening here in Michigan. Here's the press release directly from the Michigan Department of State. Department of State takes action against Michigan vehicle dealership. Dealership has gotten a little bit of hot water, as they say. And the Department of State is reviewing the case for possible referral to the Department of the Attorney General. So the entity that deals with the licensing can do things with the license. But when it comes to criminal acts, if they think they see criminal acts, they can refer that to the Attorney General. So there could be follow-up criminal activity also with respect to a prosecution, for example. So on December 4th, the Michigan Department of State suspended the license of LaFontaine Motors of Livonia, Inc., also known as LaFontaine Hyundai of Livonia, for imminent harm to public. The vehicle dealership is located on Plymouth Road in Livonia. The dealership was summarily suspended for several alleged violations of the Michigan Vehicle Code. The violations were discovered during an investigation by MDOS regulatory staff of the dealership, falsifying documentation so it could lease used vehicles as new. And that, of course, is a very serious allegation. You go in, you buy a vehicle, you go, oh, this thing's new. And you find out that it's not new. It means you probably overpaid. The violations included committing fraudulent acts in connection with selling or otherwise dealing in vehicles where LaFontaine falsely stated that a customer had not taken delivery of a vehicle to lease the vehicle as new to another customer. So they said this vehicle's never been delivered before, and it had been. That's the allegation. Fraudulently certified a vehicle as new on an MDOS application for title and registration. And so the application for title is a document called an RD-108 in Michigan, and that document it gets filled out by the dealership. And the buyer signs it, they sign it, and a copy of it goes to Lansing. And then they look at it and double check the math on it because it's one of the things that you use to calculate the sales tax. And then they issue a registration. So that's why it's called an application for title and registration. And so, of course, the title also gets generated by that document. One of the things that document asks is this vehicle new or used? And that's, generally speaking, a this or that proposition, a binary proposition. Car can't be both, okay? It's one or the other. And so they say that the dealership was somehow taking vehicles that were used and passing them off as new. And sometimes I've had people say, but Steve, you know, where does this stuff actually get caught? Well, it's actually a rather simple thing. If the vehicle is not new, but that box is checked on the RD-108, boom. Pretty straightforward. Now, somebody could claim, well, gee, maybe it was a Scrivener's error. It was a mistake made by someone filling out paperwork. One time, maybe. More than once? So the question also is, there's other documents. So dealerships in Michigan are required to hang on to all the documents that get created at the time of the sale of a car. And they put them in a thing called a deal folder. And so I've mentioned before that the Department of State can come in and inspect the books and inventory of a car dealership. And so if they want to, and especially if they got complaints, they can come in and say, let's see the deal folders for these cars. Because the purchase agreement would also show how the car was presented as to whether it was new or used. And the purchase agreement, although not sent to Lansing, would still be in the deal folder. And by the way, the consumer would have a copy also. So that's the first allegation. They were also specifically just alleged to have misrepresented a used vehicle as new. They're also alleged to have failed to have a title in immediate possession with the odometer information properly completed. And so, obviously, if they're selling a car, they needed the title to it. And the rules are they got to have it in their possession, their immediate possession. Failing to properly issue a temporary registration. Failing to properly complete the MDOS application for title and registration. Again, that's to properly complete it. In other words, it may have been completed, but it's completed improperly. Failing to make application for title and registration and purchaser's name within 21 days of vehicle delivery. And I don't know how that can possibly happen short of just being an oversight that happens once or twice. Because most car dealerships I've become familiar with, you might say, Steve, how many is that? Hundreds? Because I've sued so many of them in 33 years of practicing law. I mean, how many have you sued in the last 33 years? And I've taken depositions of people who work at car dealers. And I've had them pull out deal folders on my clients' deals. And I've gone through these. And these kinds of mistakes don't happen that often as mistakes. So usually, a well-run car dealership has got someone whose job it is to complete the paperwork and make sure the paperwork is done properly. And so it's usually somebody sitting in their own office. In the old days, they had this specific printer that you could put these documents into and it would type them out for you because they weren't laser printed. They were typed out because they were carbon copies. And now, of course, modern technology, they've got a lot of that stuff updated. But there's almost always one person who's designated to be the one who actually gets all the documentation together, fills it out for the dealership, and then takes it back to the salesperson. The salesperson gets a bunch of signatures. Then they take it back to that person, and that person double checks it and sends it off to Lansing. And that's a figurative statement because there are ways to get those documents to Lansing without sending them off to Lansing. They can actually, I believe, be brought to the Secretary of State's office directly if there's a local office. Be that as it may, the documents are turned into the state. So when the state sees somebody's done this more than once, they're going to go, okay, this appears to be systemic. It appears to be a problem. This is not a one-off. So the 21 days thing is a problem. And that happened a lot during COVID because people would buy a car during COVID and they'd submit the documents to Lansing and they wouldn't get their plates or whatever they needed within 21 days. And people go, what do I do? And so there were some dealerships issuing temp tags over and over and over again. And it was kind of like accepted at that time as long as you could prove the documents were sent in. So if you're driving around in a car that's got expired temp tags or it's got the third temp tag in a row on it, and a cop pulls you over and goes, I've been seeing you around this neighborhood for the last 6 weeks driving around with a temporary tag. What's up with that? You said, look, I've bought the car, and they tell me that things are just slow in Lansing because they were at that time, but they're not anymore. And so if you buy a car and don't get the title or the registration or whatever it is you're expecting in your state, some states like Michigan now, if you buy a car that's got a lien on it, the lien holder hangs on to the title till you pay the car off. So you wouldn't get the title itself, but you'd get a registration, So these violations created an ongoing imminent threat to the public health, safety, or welfare of the public, requiring emergency action. And one other thing I'd like to point out is some people are going to say, but Steve, if I bought a brand new car with 1,000 miles on it, or I bought a used car with 1,000 miles on it, there's no difference. What's the difference? Let's play devil's advocate here, Steve. There's no difference. Yes, there is. Among other things, if you're borrowing money, the lender wants to have valuable collateral. The brand new car is worth more than the used car. Simply checking that box differently on the RD 108 does, in fact, impact the value of the collateral. Absolutely. MDOS and the Michigan Automobile Dealers Association issued bulletins reiterating what makes a vehicle used under the Michigan Vehicle Code. So think about this. MDOS and the Automobile Dealers Association issued bulletins reminding dealerships what a used vehicle is, just in case they needed to brush up on that. As part of the investigation, regulatory staff discovered that the LaFontaine corporate office suggested submitting false information even after the bulletins were issued, and the dealership then followed this advice to allegedly sell or lease the vehicles as new. So consumers who have a complaint against this dealership or any others are encouraged to call the Office of Investigative Services Automotive Complaint Line. You can go online and look that up and just look up Michigan Department of State and look up car dealers and you can find this information. But most car dealers, especially the big ones that sell new cars, are run very, very well. And in fact, the number of times I ran into paperwork being filed improperly, very, very uncommon. Very, very uncommon. And I've bought new cars in my life also. In fact, I bought one just a couple of months ago. And I remember going through all the paperwork going, this is a good refresher for you, Steve. It's been a while since you've examined a set of papers this closely. Usually when I'm talking to a client about a vehicle, it's usually I'm looking at the RD 108 and I'm looking at the purchase agreement. And the reason I do that is that in Michigan, the Lemon Law applies to new cars, not used. So interestingly, when this dealership is leasing used vehicles as new, somebody would think, oh, I've got lemon law protection because the car is new. And they buy the car, it turns out to be defective, they start going through this process, and somewhere down the road, the manufacturer is going to step up and go, that was a used vehicle you bought there. That's not on us, that's on them. So that's another reason that the sale of a used vehicle as new might be a problem. But the weird part about it is that I've talked to people before, and I've asked them questions about their vehicle purchases. And they say, where would I find that information? And I almost always say the RD-108, which is the application for title. In fact, I'm going to find one and put one up on the screen. Application for Michigan title has all the information. It's one document, has everything on it. So it's got the dealership's name, the dealership's license number. It's got your name, your information. It's got the VIN of the vehicle you're buying. It's got the VIN of the vehicle you're trading in if you're trading in a vehicle. It shows the mileage of the vehicle you're buying. And then it shows what you paid for it, what you put down, and it's got a whole column, a whole stack of numbers on one side that shows everything about the deal. So I've asked a person before, so did you buy a service contract? I'm not sure. What do you mean you're not sure? You know, it was a long session, the negotiations, and the guy mentioned one, but I don't know for sure. I say, okay, pull out your RD-108 and start reading through the column of numbers. And if you find one in there that's a service contract, you paid for it. Now, it could be dressed up as something else, but the point is that that document has every single thing on it that has to do with that sale. So the purchase agreement will often show almost all the exact same information, just in a different format. But the point is, I've had somebody on the phone with me, and I'm just simply talking to them. I don't have one in front of me. I'm like, okay, look in the left, top left corner, blah, 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 okay, bottom left corner, okay. And, you know, so that document itself. So it is going to be interesting to see what happens here. Because as you can imagine, if this dealership literally gets shut down where they cannot sell cars, that's a real bad position to be in as a car dealer. So they're scrambling, I'm sure, to get this resolved. And I know guys who do dealership defense. In fact, I'm willing to bet you that I know the attorney who's going to be handling this case. It's going to be one of 2 or 3 people I know who do this kind of work. And they're going to do what they can to get that operation up and running again. But really the question is, how many times did this happen? And the real problem they're going to have is, if it happened a bunch of times, the state might say, before we can let you operate again, we need to come in and examine a whole bunch of deal folders at random just to see if it happened more often than we know about. So it's a crazy story, but it's a dealership temporarily out of business because of this. Now, I have to clarify that a little bit. They're not out of business completely. They can obviously repair cars if they got a repair facility. And they might be able to sell used cars if they've got a different entity doing that. But as it is right now, the license of the one dealership, LaFontaine Motors of Livonia, also known as LaFontaine Hyundai of Livonia, they have had their license suspended for the time being. And I'll apologize right now because it's actually Hyundai. But I know I've said Hyundai a couple times, and people, for whatever reason, get very, very bent out of shape about that one. So there you go, Derek. Thanks for sending it. Directly from the AG's office is the press release. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. We are confronted with insurmountable opportunities.